Okay, so let's begin. Welcome once more to another discussion of film in Talking Films online. This film, Karnan, the Tamil film that released in 2021, was suggested to us by Dickens Leonard, who will also be initiating the discussion today. Dickens Leonard is presently Assistant Professor in Cultural Studies at the Center for Studies in Social Sciences, Kolkata. For his PhD, he researched on the writings of 19th century anti-caste Tamil intellectual Ayodhi Das at the Center for Comparative Literature, University of Hyderabad. Thereafter, he temporarily taught in the same center for 3 years from 2017 to 2020. He recently received the Fulbright postdoc grant to work on a monograph titled Ethical Dimensions of Casteless Community that extends his PhD in the US. He was formerly a DAAD visiting PhD fellow at the Center for Modern Indian Studies, August University, Göttingen, Germany. He has published on anti-caste thought and Tamil films in renowned journals and edited anthologies. Thanks very much, Lenny, for accepting to be, first of all, for suggesting this very interesting film that people are talking about, writing about as well, and also for agreeing to initiate discussion today. Welcome to TFO, and over to you.
Thank you, Professor Nikhila. Professor Nikhila was my teacher and was also had a brief, very interesting, memorable relationship with her from my research days, early research days. She was also my MPhil external. So for that memory, and I'm really honored. And we've been also doing similar collaborative, discussions, reading for the last 2 to 3 years. So I'm really excited and honored to be part of this venture, public venture through the digital mode. I am told it started after the pandemic and lockdown and the digital social, that we are all part of. And I'm really glad to have this opportunity to discuss, and introduce as well as invite us to think about this interesting and important film in the Tamil context, but also which is made available because of the kind of changes that have gone through in the last 2 to 3 years with the OTT platform, film being available to everyone, kind of a new phenomena of engaging with contemporary films, and which has significantly changed way we engage and experience films as such. I thought it is worthwhile and imperative to think about this, what I see as a very interesting movement, as well as a change in the spectatorial experience of engaging with Tamil films in its history of watching it, but also certain modes in which the new social experience of say engaging or discussing or debating or working on films implies all of us to be part of this industry as such. So thanks again, TFO and esteemed participants and organizers who've been doing this, and then also making this film as part of the discussion. So what I will do is I have a I've tried to plan this talk, and in the sense that which I've been thinking through as soon as the film was out by May, June. I've been talking about this. I've been thinking about this film, but also I've been thinking about this film in the context of my own work and what has been happening in Tamil cinema particularly, but also in generally Indian cinema. The kind of changes that have been mapped from say in the last 10 years, and then how it is significantly come to a certain kind of a rupturous moment with, probably for me in my own reading, with Karnan, because with Karnan historically, for instance, perhaps this would be the last, or rather the one of the interesting films where it co-appeared together with the OTT release and the theatrical release, right? And both of them fed into each other, you know, immediately in the mid, in the very interesting time period between these two waves, when there was a sudden opening after the lockdown, and then the film could come at once together to be released in wide, wide releases with controlled participation, which is a big hit in the theaters after the pandemic, after the after the first wave of the pandemic, which is still on. The pandemic is still on, and a kind of, an intermediate time period when, when they opened the theaters and the public spaces where the film was released, and it was immediately received, and there was this huge, kind of fan moment of a kind for the film, as well as there was this OTT release, which then opened up newer dimensions of discussions on the film, within Tamil Nadu, but or within the Tamil public sphere, but also in the because of OTT, it could reach out to so many other spaces and opening up to discussions and so on and so forth. So what I've put in is, in the presentation, in the invitation, like, and I want to place the discussions that opened up on Karnan as such, but also open up a some kind of a reading that I have on Karnan, because I seriously think the film is part of a longer trajectory of the history of engaging with, a similar spectacles, within Tamil culture, within Tamil cinema, as a certain kind of a, citational kind of a recurrent kind of a pattern to it, and how, and in this continuity, this comes as a kind of a third kind of a wave, or a third kind of a rupture of say watching and engaging with a historical moment of a kind, so I want to place it that level, because the film itself, with its prescient moment, opens up newer dimensions because of its historical importance, when a lot of changes that are happening with digital, with multiple screen, with, a handheld experience of watching films, from, watching from big screens, so on and so forth. But there's also something internally that is happening within how, over the last, say, 600 years, from which cinema has started off, in southern India, right? There's probably kind of three moments we can think of to think about Karnan as a film, within the history of Tamil culture and Tamil history, right? So I've placed it both and see how this works out, and I want to also foreground what newness, that we can actually bring to understand and interpret Karnan as a moment, as an event, probably not a moment, as an event. It's eventing something, and that's why I thought probably, a certain an interesting, I think, exercise on, or an experiment with spatial temporality and sensibilities being, worked out in this film, I felt, because it works with, of course, the heroic image and all that, it's all been spoken about, but there's something also at the level of a spectatorial identification, as a spatial temporal sensibility that the film operates and offers, as a certain kind of a poetic, which is also political at the same time. And I think that has been something that this aesthetic has been worked out, right, as a historical phenomena in the Tamil context. And I think I'll foreground that and then open up for discussion. All right. So Karan, as a discourse within the Tamil public sphere, has been opened up for a very interesting analysis. I've been reading it. I've been part of some of them. I've been also watching it because it is part of the digital social media that we are all embroiled in. There's a new now to it, to the film. There's a new now, and the new now is also part of making sense of the film. And one of the very interesting points that have come in the discussions is how the film operates at once at two levels. That there's a story that is, or rather, there's a discourse that is within the film, and within the film, uh, uh, there's a discourse within the film which connects to, say for example, a referential moment, say for example, of a real event, or of films that have gone, in the past, referring to what kind of who's the hero today, or what kind of a criminal can it be reinterpreted, reversed into. So it's a story within that is, that is itself. Say, for example, the deification to what is historical and so on. So this is a story within that is that gives us some kind of a new now to the discourse. And there's the story outside the film, right? And there's a continuous reference to an outside, to something which is outside the theater or outside the screen, to which it keeps on referring or keeps on intimating to. And this has been a very interesting dynamic, and it's not something new to cinema. I mean, this is within people who are doing cinema studies and culture history. We keep on working and pondering and pushing this. But I think the new now is also the new now, perhaps, of say of the subaltern who is also, or the subordinate who also becomes part of making or making sense of these films, and they become participants to this film. So I think that becomes a very interesting, I think, one of the major discursive moment, for opening up. Like, so in the 1990s, when literature as a field was, particularly Indian literature as a field in each of the vernacular languages, was opened up to questions of, say, women writing, questions of Dalits writing, and so on and so forth, within the paradigm of power as a mold. Here, what has happened with this film? This film becomes part of a larger trajectory of films, where this new now is also thought of being identified with the subaltern groups or within the subaltern articulation as such. And that is something which is not the first film, or which is not something new. This has become a very dynamic narrative. KARNAN as a film becomes dynamic narrative to enter into this debate on the subordinated. I think people have referred this, and that's one point. And and this film particularly, with this interesting exploitation of, say, of metaphorical, of the metaphors, the umpteen metaphors, in fact overdone metaphors, sometimes very drastically, taking, because the filmmaker is also a literature, is a poet, he's a writer, and is somebody who's trained in the Tamil literary history. So then that writing, which then becomes part of making the film, which is actually an old act, and it actually an act from the, these kind of writers who become part of, direction. It's something of the past, right? And today, like, largely you have new directors who are working within say, for instance, within the new kind of workforce, be it software engineers or people who are doing MBA and so on and so forth. Post 1990s, you have a different patch of training, a trained person who worked under so many assistant director, or so many as an assistant director with so many other directors, and his own story. The story comes along. The director's story comes along as his arrival, and as an arrival, and it kind of is etched into the making of the film. So the metaphorical, say, for example, the deification of a unmarried girl, of a young unmarried woman, as a death, with the film as it starts, the sister of the hero, or the small girl who dies on the road unattended, like a dog, and then she becomes a deity, and there's a social story behind the deity, with something like a very civic oriented right of, or a civic oriented facility, like having a bus, a bus stand in a space, and that becomes a kind of a social story, a social drama, wherein the myths and the history of, say, Kodinkalam conflict, or the violence that happened in the 1990s, merged into an interesting story of a heroic, which is also a kind of a deifying act of a kind, a deifying act of a kind, where the hero is comes in a kind of a placement where the metaphorical, the real, the myth and the history, myth and the historical comes together, a certain kind of a very interesting way in which it comes together to narrate the social drama, right? And this historical moment of the film, in fact, appears with a certain kind of, because of a certain kind of a history of, say, Dalits writing, or Dalit filmmakers who then come up with, with a history, with, say, from early 2000, from 2010 onwards, with a series of films within the industry, but also across other industries in Marathi or say in Hindi, coming in, opening up this space, this debate on the question of caste as a social issue, as a social content to be operated, and but also with a certain kind of agential intervention in which these films, but also within the popular domain, which they wanted to make not parallel cinema or art cinema, but also to actually make use of the domains and then actually intervene into a larger, very clearly a larger kind of a apparatus of reaching people as such. So in a sense, the new role of the filmmaker, who's a storyteller, but also a very social person, social activist person, all of them kind of merged into a kind of a category of the filmmaker or the director of the film as such, right? And I think in people have opened up this as how Karnan could be open. These are the new things that one can think about, the film actually as operating or opening up a new kind of a discourse within, say, studies on film, but also work on film and cast, but also work on film and a social conflict or retelling of a social conflict and so on and so forth. So what is very interesting in this very argumentative debates is the history of the medium. Is going through a very interesting change, right? There is at once a particular kind of media which is opened up in a way in which say this a small village is the only village which is being narrated here, right? I think hardly 20 kilometers they would have traveled from the space of Pulimkulam, which was actually completely set up for making the film. The space of the film, this is just a singular village, and the bunch of characters who operate there. Hardly probably one shot they went out would have been to that running open call for for the for recruitment into the army. That would have been one shot which is outside, but largely the film is set up almost 90 to 95% within this one space within the village, right? And then the whole technological kind of apparatuses that were used to capture this film, all kind of global kind of techniques that were used to bring the story to a kind of a global, this is something that the operation of it is something new. The particular is then opened up with a certain kind of a larger, it's a capital dynamic, right? A dynamic of the capital here. So wherein the content is then, is operated within, say, a story, constantly referring back to a minor narrative, a minor interpretation of Mahabharata, right? Of Karnan, of the abuse Karnan, Karnan as retelling a story, and that itself has a long history within the Tamil filmic, history. I'll be going into that. That's why I titled this of three Karnans, right? And not limited to this history of, so say, this mega war, the Bharata war, but a war of a kind which has a certain kind of an folk folkloristic representative identification of the subordinate, of the marginalized, in the story, right? In the story. So in a sense that from, say, with Tamil films which have identified or opened up this idea of image trap with Pandyan's work of the MGR as the star politician, the star hero, then actually creates a relative feasibility. From there to a certain kind of groundedness to which this heroic as an identification is engineered and in a way demonstrated in the film, right? There's a kind of feasibility to the characterization, the relative feasibility, and certain kind of effective expressions that are being operated, right? Through characterizations, through identifications, through way in which films have been the story has been narrated, and also at once not necessarily as something like the bus, bus as a kind of a vehicle of modernity, and I've been thought about in distinct ways. But what if what if that is the modern vehicle is not pushed upon, right, or rather implemented, or rather conscribed into communities like from where the story is set up, and what happens that as an aspiration becomes a kind of the aspirational modernity becomes a certain kind of unequal modernity, then and in this inequality, then there is the film attempts to a retelling of a distribution, right? A distributive aspiration. So I think these are the historicizations of the context in which the film opens up an interesting debate within film studies, but also within the public sphere, right? I think in the last 5 to 6 months, I think in this context will open up to actually to think to suggest what I how I intervene and think about this film for a conceptual framing, right? And I want to call it, is this a very interesting third Karnan, which is harking back, referring back to two early moments, right, within the film history of Tamil watching, or Tamil film history as such, right? So I want to just foreground this first song which comes in the film, which goes by this, I've just anglicized the word Kandavara Cholanga. It's basically translates into call him when you see him. So generally films, studies is largely we have we've talked about as creating a spectacle, a specular experience where the eye is foregrounded, right, in watching the spectacle, or in experiencing spectacle at the level of the eye, where the camera becomes a major framing or major individuating, technology, right? Individuating technology, where the whole embodiment of experience of film is then prioritized by the eye of what you see, right? And probably the film starts off with this, with this very interesting song, which goes on to actually, call him when you see him, take him with my hand, and it goes on to state, the song goes on to say, it's basically an invocation song, and the invocation is on this figure, who has been just criminalized and taken into arrested and taken into the prison, right? It starts off with that, and then goes on to immediately cite that this person was not the Karnan of Mahabharata, right? Basically, right? He's not born of the sun, or not with the moon, witness it, nor did was he born with a shield which will protect him, nor was he this mythical. It immediately cites a negative identification, negation of, of this is a very folkloristic thing. There's always a different reading of distinct myths, like be it Ramayana, you have, Mahabharata, and so on and so forth. So this is also perhaps at once a citation at the history of imaging for me, Karnan, within the Tamil history. So in this context of where image overtakes sound in the filmic experience, Pandian's image trap is a reference, right? Where MJR as this hero is trapped in his image, and then that becomes a certain kind of content for political to emerge within the vernacular states of it's Pandian, but also you have other important scholars who have made this argument to build on, right? How there's a trap and so on and so forth. So this images over sound and eyes over ears have been the general trend of looking at or watching or understanding films. But what happens in this first song itself, there's a certain kind of an engineering, certain kind of a sensibility which not necessarily at once, open eye-opening moments, but also certain, it opens up to moving away from this complete attraction. It hits the ear, it's the ear, like when you see, like call, it's a kind of a calling, right? Calling someone, and if you can see him, tell him, like things like that, right? Where is this someone, where is this Karnan, for these communities, is something I think the film actually cites and immediately opens up to open up questions, though this could be this film could be placed within, an oppressed group, people trying to tell their story and so on. So that at the representation level, it perhaps also has content to invite us to think, is the film is asking us to move beyond, some kind of representation questions of representation, and pushes us to perhaps think about the echoes that are generated in the film. I think that is a very interesting way in which, to call in for to push this film within, or rather within the context, within a certain kind of a kind of a effect, an effect of, say, the post 1990s historical moment, and the way in which films and literary movements have actually participated and opened up a new dimension. I think that's where the thirding of this, or thirding event, or third event, or a third space, Baba as a piece on the third space, perhaps is being invented here. And I think from this film, what I'm going to push is, there is perhaps an archaeology, call for an archaeology of the resistant and the participative here, and I have a reason for it to actually showcase the three important ways in which Karnan as a film, or Karnan as a character, as a figuration, has been cited and used and probably populated in the Tamil screen as such. So to foreground that this poetic reading is also political at once. I'll go into that in a while. So this is what I just started off, but just to quickly run over, because many of you would know this, many of you film scholars and people who are working on films would know this, like in the cinema studies, how film as an image movement, works with the spectatorial gaze identification, but also some way in which film as a moving image over time, makes us part of, or works with a certain kind of a time space, configuration as such, very very philosophical, very theoretically as such. But at the same time, in Indian cinema, you have mechanical reproduction, but also technology. People have worked on how camera look works with a certain kind of ideological framing, and this ideological framing also kind of produces gazes, where the spectator is also produced at once. This sort of identification, and how the subject in which this identification happens becomes part of the Indian cinema. People have worked on this within the dynamics and discourses of secular modern citizenship or subject, the caste gender problematic, the spectacle itself as an experienced moment with fan clubs and so on and so forth, political participation, so on and so on. And within the Tamil particular historical film viewing cultures, the heroic is a very specific, I'm sure, as along with other film industries as well, important film industry as well, with the way in which the political and the poetic comes along with the image and the sound. Right, and this has been a work from, say, 1960s with the Dravidian movement, and the 1990s with the way in which the realignment of a certain kind of a global order. And in this context, say in 2021, we just had the film called other interesting film called Sarpata Param, very interesting again about history. 1970s, and this film goes back to 1990s, and quite an interesting way in which this recreation of the moment, or kind of a rereading of these moments, are being set up for us, by these very interesting, actors or filmmakers who take these roles together as agential storytellers, of subaltern communities, but also from social activists, also filmmakers, and they kind of making a movement of a kind, making films as as a kind of a momentary exercise of for their own times as such. So this is a kind of a background which I want to uh, pitch in, these three kernels, right? So to just introduce this, of course, everyone would know about the Dravidian image speech making, Dravidian movement, and its use of film as a vehicle, right? And the star as a vehicle for, say, star vehicle as a kind of a political figuration for a subjectivity to be formulated vis-a-vis the national public sphere from, say, after independence, especially, right? So this is something of a kind of a people have argued that this was something which was away from, or an extension, but also in a way a kind of a disruption from theater, right, to the cinema, within Tamil history, right? So where the linguistic and ethno-nationalistic hearing kind of, say, in Tamil, becomes part of us, or kind of a identification of it with a cinematic image, right? So you have the movement and cinema coming together, and wherein a certain kind of historical injustice is foregrounded with questions of humiliation, or say, for example, more important, more than humiliation, it is assertion, sometimes separation, but also importantly cultural vehicles as such, right? The star hero and the leader as the sovereign kind of an identification in the 1960s, right? So this kind of a historical context, in the 1960s was also reflected in the first way in which the first wave of retelling this important epic Mahabharata, right? While Mahabharata was used within the nationalist context for a different purpose, right? As an epic, but also as a story to be told about this grander national imagination, right? Within the literary, but also within theater, within films, and so on and so forth. But for the movement, for the Dravidian movement and Tamil cinema, it interestingly took this foregrounding, or rather, foregrounding. I'm sure it's also in other. I'm sure it's also in other film industries, southern film industries. Karnan becomes Karnan of the Mahabharata, the interesting figure within this war, becomes a certain kind of an image and figure to retell, to countertell this mythic identification, right? So for what happens is there are two retellings of very interesting moments within this history of this nation, history of this Tamil retelling of this national story. And the first one was in 1964 by B.R. Pantulu, Karnan 1964, and the second one was in 1991 by the stalwart director Talapati, which was acted again by two very important stars, and both the films were acted by big stars. Right, Pantulu was acted by Shivaji Ganeshan and N.T. Ramarao of the Telugu industry, and you have Mani Ratnam making this film with these two superstars, Rajnikant and Mammootty, and kind of give an adaptive deconstruction of the story to make it tell about the story about after emergency, after when the welfare state was not working out, and the state was slowly moving towards a certain kind of a liberal identification, and how certain identification is recreated, right? Who then becomes part of the state, who becomes a part of the vanquished side, and so on, so forth, right? So this retelling is quite interesting because it comes after every 30 years. The 1930s, 1960s was Karnan, just in the context of the Dravidian movement. 1991, this is before Roja, which is again a major interventionist study, right, within Tamil film studies, right? 1960s was one moment, 1990s was another moment. So Talapati was another 1991, just before liberalization, just before the mandir, the masjid market was just during that time. This film was a kind of a very interesting way. I'll just go to the film in a while, and you have 2021, exactly after 30 years, right? Another Karnan coming and pitching in to tell a very nuanced way in which a third kind of a rupture, third kind of a discontinuity, but also constantly citing back to tell a different kind of identification, right? So I think that's where I think the inside story and the external story works wonderfully with Karnan, right? So the first Karnan, as kind of opening up a certain kind of a very interesting Dravidian imagination and Dravidian kind of a social justice of a kind, or rather self-respect as a mode of identification, was actually portrayed or retold the story of Mahabharata from Karnan's point of view. And Shivaji Ganeshan acted as this epic characterization with this theatrical moment. Shivaji Ganeshan was Karnan, N.T. Ramarao was Krishnan. Right? There's a grandeur and orchestration, one of the I think highest spent film of its times, where speech making and third person singing, right? Say there's a very interesting song which was generally gargantuan of a kind. The song called the good and the generous hearted, which is particularly a song on Karnan, right? But a song which is sung by Krishna, NTR as a character. The Krishna sings a song on Karna when Karna is dying, or rather is dying very slowly. So what happens is the music director again, here uses a singular Shanai wind instrument, which was largely used amongst folk artists and snake charmers. Was that particular instrument was introduced for the first time, for as a hearing. So in a sense, his death and pathos was also constantly brought in with newer experiments with with musical instruments and so on. So it started off, I think, with this kind of an experimentation, right? And I think when we experience Karnan as such, also in this the third Karnan, which is 2021 Mari Selvaraj Karnan, you have this kind of an orchestration which goes into a different mode altogether. You have this folk, kind of representation, music from the from that particular context, which is brought in for a kind of a global coming together of multiple instruments. You have multiple instruments coming together. I think this was not something new, which is already operated and opened up in, say, by 1991 with liberalization, and particularly with the second current. But what happens in the first one is to actually bring in this instrument as a kind of a representative moment or a representative kind of an experience. And I think that's where the Dravidian movement history, the context, works in this first retelling of Karnan. So you have M.S. Vishwanathan, the music director, right, to actually compose the songs for a historical retelling, but also grand orchestration. And there's a kind of a going together of the political, the poetic, and the content in which this was demonstrated. I think the mythic, the myth as such, it's not something constantly only used by, say, the filmmakers. You see it coming again back in, say, Ranjit's earlier Kala, right, where Ramayana was actually contextualized and retold. But there's a history to it, to which this telling of the story is also referring back, citing back, right, or inciting back, inciting this history. You tell a new narrative, a new presence to actually articulate itself, right? So if the first Karnan was this Dravidian hearing, a Dravidian retelling, a Dravidian say Karnan telling, and talking of mythical injustice as something which is historical in nature. And in the first 15 minutes, if you watch the film, the whole Dravidian rhetoric, the self-respect rhetoric, is actually captured, with humiliation, redistribution, kind of a justice, or so on and so forth, within this history of telling the story, right, from Karnan's perspective. Excuse me. So I think that is something, kind of an inaugural moment, for the history of telling about marginal characters, marginal stories. And I think this became a certain kind of a capsulated into a package, right, by this very a stalwart filmmaker who went on to make his own art within national cinema, and who was crucial in, right, by the 1990s, to connect this Tamil cinema for the national audience, with this 1994 Roja, right, when Roja got this national award for national integration, right? So this film, uh, 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 um, um, Mani Ratnam actually bringing back, right, not only trying to tell Mahabharata, but also, right, citing back to this first Karnan, right, as something dramatic, to a certain way in which a kind of a what we call a package realism, can be set up, a social drama or melodrama, right? Not social drama, it's a melodrama, where a kind of a, what do you say, this is adapted for a simplistic identification, or rather, what to say, marginal simplistic identification of the hero. And this is very much interestingly, I mean, the film, if you watch, could be seen as two stars coming together, Mammootty and Rajinikanth coming together, and it's this very, very interesting BGM spent, Raja, right, between the films. But if you see the songs, right, from, it's all about little personalities, little persons, right, persons who are, like, say, for example, one of the songs is called Chinnathai, which is of little mothers, like a mother who is, a mother who was just begotten a child out of wedding, right? And about Rakamas, people who are not, part of any storytelling, about wild cuckoos, right? And along with, it's a kind of a coming together of distinct instrumentation of sounds together, right, as a symphonic composition. So it's for the first time, symphony was also experimented with this film, right, with in Tamil, right? And you have this person who is singing, about Karnan, right, who was to be theatrically present, right, as NTR or as Krishna, suddenly becomes this invisible third person in Tarapati, right? Say, for example, the song Chinnathayavar, which basically sings about this mother who has, who's basically Kunti, the representative of Kunti, right? Who becomes a a little mother, a little deity, right, of a kind, right? And then the person who sings it is an invisible presence. There's no one to actually represent that as a character, like the theatrical character of NTR, right? In the film, it's something in the background, and the whole song is in the background, and the song is very, very how to say, like the song is the background, and then there's only action that goes on in the film. Like things like that were set up technically to narrate a very, kind of a smaller moment, a smaller realization of, say, of this epic Mahabharata in a very small, say, slum, right, vis-a-vis the state, the slum and the state kind of a confrontation, and the legal and the paralegal in the confrontation as such. And you have the song, I think probably, because of Raja's, intrusion into the film industry, instruments that were hitherto seen as, kind of, lowered, or something which is non, which is non, say, sacral of a kind, actually coming together, right? Say the parai, the dapu, along with, the orchestration of, say, the Carnatic, along with this symphony, Western Symphony Composition, coming together as fusion. So there's a kind of fusion coming together, the singular plural presence, with flutes and so on. So a fusion of harmonic orchestration with Carnatic ensemble, folk instrumentation, trying to, kind of, bring the story on the screen as something which is relatable, as an attempt. Right, was made in this film as a second film, and it goes very well with the with the politics of that time, right? With 1990s, from grand narratives to representational questions, with with a breakdown of the nation into a certain kind of a governmental crisis post emergency, and by 1990s, a certain opening up of the market, of a kind, and then the story also coming in, at that particular marketing moment, of a nationalist kind of a formulation of what is a nation, newer identification of what is a nation, who is going to be this modern secular image of the nation, and how somebody would equally, that figure, I think Arvind Swami's first film, as this figure who represents, the Pandavas, right, as a state, and that figure goes on to act in Roja, right. This figuration goes on to, this kind of identification goes on to act in Roja, which then opens up newer debates about who is the secular model who goes to work on, say, in the digital economy, in the governmental IT sector, as figuration, as to relate to, and so on and so forth, right. And very interestingly, you see the starting of the film starts in 1960s. This hero Surya, again representing, Karnan, Surya, the son of Surya, and so on and so forth, right? Is born in the year in 1969, when DMK comes to power, right? So the movie starts in 1960s, but the narration is 1990s, right? So you have some kind of a citation to the original, or rather the earlier Karnan, first Karnan, Shivaji's Karnan, and then a kind of a certain pattern that mimics each other to tell a certain kind of a, retelling or a counter story, or rather parallel story, of these interesting citations of time, right? And of course, Raja's, though there is no representation for this, say, singular voice which tells the story of these little mothers, of wild cuckoos, and so on and so forth. But what happens is what could be opened up is already by then, some kind of eye closing but ear opening events were actually open up with this music. There's life of this music outside the screen, and the kind of, the songs that were used for parallel, say, the songs were constantly used in other films, were constantly used in public affairs, public, kind of re-renderings, and so on and so forth. So in a sense, a certain moment was opened up, at least in the work in which the sound was used, right? So, a kind of a post-Dravidian, if speeches and kind of, staged talks image traps where the sense of the revealing, there's a post-revealing sensorial common which was used by hearing, right? An effective expressive aesthetic or fusion as a political ethic was actually brought in a certain kind of a moment, historical moment in 1990s, interesting moment where this film was actually exercised. And I think this is where perhaps, right, the third kernel actually comes in, right? When things and names were coded into data, newer kind of language. What is a pixel of a screen, and so on and so forth? How do you bring in a certain kind of digital economizing of, say, of life stories, life narratives, right, into songs and voices as presence within the screen, right? So this is where I think an emergence and explosion of the marginal in Karnan 2021 or Karnan 3 or third Karnan operates, right? Perhaps I'm foregrounding the sound, but I think this is the context in which I think this artistic pronouncements of the marginalized, so the realistic background wherein this hero is of the subaltern, kind of it is visibilized, right? His listening is visibilized. This third person is visibilized as oneself, right? Which was other perhaps the earlier identification. So what happens is with the first song you have death songs, performances, invocations, plurality of sounds and images, a kind of a distributive justice, at least at the scenic level is being at least attested to, right? Or claimed as, in this kind of fusion of, orchestration, Carnatic ensemble, folk instrumentation, which had actually gone on, which are used and kind of, pushed into bringing together the sound and the image, or the time and space, the temporal and the spatial dynamic together as the presence of this folk, the marginalized folk on which these films are claimed to be, pronounced on, claimed to be narrated on. I think this is perhaps a kind of a kind of a content in which Karnan, the 2021 brings its life, brings a sensibility of identification. For me, in this argument and in its invitation to think about this film is this citation to this interesting trajectory. So this Kanda Varaswan, which if you see and if you see, you tell, is a coming together perhaps of the seen and the heard, which was hitherto unseen and heard in the earlier Kanda. So it's about, there's quite a lot of metaphors which in the film itself is operated. This picture is very interesting because the Kandavara Solunga, the song that was depicted in the film is something else, but there also is a parallel production that happened because the music director and the film director wanted to also represent where did they take this song from, which has a life of its own outside the screen. And there's a separate song, how the song is made, who are the folk artists who were used, in what context the song was actually all necessarily used. Say, for example, different kind of an artistic experience or artistic maneuver, which is wall painting and so on and so forth, right? And how this was recorded. That making of the song also was made available because of the digital, developments, the kind of access to it, the kind of presenting it as also kind of a political, eventing of it, or rather, or even as a marketing eventing of it, so on and so forth. Right? But at the context or the content level, what we are trying to also be exposed is to also see this what is, or rather to engage with what was unseen and heard as also populating in this moment as such. So what happens is there's a very interesting kind of within the popular films. This all happens within the popular context, in the popular trajectory of the popular film, right? A metaphorical way in which a metaphorical and which has this very interesting engagement with real has embodiment of, say, death and birth, right, within the screen. History and art, right, or history is art, right, like which year is it, or which particular context is it, the Kudian Kulam or the Pudian Kulam, right? That kind of a discussion. The time space as always the here and the now. It's a constant kind of a invoking of, right, invoking of this history as a pedagogy, as a pedagogical tool, or a kind to be taught and learned about, in the sense that kind of a content is driven in this social drama, and a certain kind of a political nature in which is an embodied forgetfulness, right, which then calls one to remember, the faceless, say for example, headless deities, or faceless deities for faceless little goddesses, right? Who are deified, or the people who are taken away from life. There's a son away life because of the state violence and so on and so forth, right? So in a sense that sadness or brutality, yeah, or or a life after say kind of social protest are used as content, right, for as an experiential content for making a social story, a story of, or rather a populating of the social or newer dimension of telling what is the social in the story, in this cinema, in using cinemas as to tell these stories, right? In a sense that the heroic is distributed, probably this could be contested, redistributed as, or as and for whom the story is being affected and being told on, right? So in a sense that apart from this critique of the heroic always coming as a certain savior, what is also attempted is a certain redistribution to this citation of this event, right? Citation of citing back to the social in the narrative, right? I think that is perhaps attempted in a film like, or rather for constantly cited back thus to this earlier Karnans as such, right? So I thought I'll stop here and then invite probably it's almost 50 minutes. I was told 40 to 45 minutes discussion. So I thought I'll stop here and see what you think of it if you watch the film and push it uh, for discussion. Thanks, Professor Nikhila. That's it with Nikhila.
Yeah. Uh, yeah. Thank you so much, Dickens, for that really, wonderful way in which you have connected three different moments of Karnan and the socio-political context which made possible the three Karnans at different points in time. Also, it's an interesting perspective to enter this discussion through music, and through sound, through the soundscape, as it were. So the film and Lenny's presentation now is open for discussion. Anyone wants to begin?
May I start?
Yeah, please go ahead, Vijay.
Yeah, a brief intervention, Dickens. It was a nice presentation indeed. But I was thinking, when we are trying to analyze a film or study a film, what do we make out of the film? I mean, what do we make out of the makers of the film? For instance, when we do a literary study of a novel or a drama, we try to understand the ideological underpinnings of that writer. For instance, we have a writer, Kailasam in Kannada, Navodaya writer, one of the well-known dramatists of that period, who has also written dramas on Karna. Okay, an English drama. The title of the drama is Brahmin's Curse, wherein he tries to present Karna in a different style, and it was very, it was something different during that time. But when we try to do a close reading of that drama, placing it in the larger context of that period, it's especially socio-political context of that period, we tend to interpret as a writer, Kailasam, trying to patronize a mythical character like Karna or Ekalavya. Okay, so can we do that kind of study in case of the first Karnan that you try to analyze? For instance, B.R. Pantulu, who was also making films in Kannada, Telugu, Tamil, and he is also known for making historical films like Kittur Chennamma in Kannada, wherein Kittur Chennamma seems to be a typical nationalist, regionalist kind of film, which is problematic from present point of view, wherein there is a glorification of the Queen, glorification of Kannada, glorification of so many aspects. How do we, I mean, you try to make a reference to Dravidian movement of that period, but that was something I didn't find it a bit convincing, especially when can we make a relationship between Karnan, first Karnan of your presentation, with the larger context, and also how do we understand the makers of this movie, B.R. Pantulu and other people who who are also um, participants in the making of this movie. Okay, you could make a broader connection between the second Karnan and other larger context, while the third, it was convincing. But in the first case, the first Karnan seems to be somewhere. How do we understand the makers of this movie, the first Karnan? That was my small intervention. Hope I was clear.
Yeah, very much. I mean, I actually thought with I mean, the first Karnan, that context and study, quite a lot of works were there. So I didn't actually push that, because you have a whole studies on South Indian cinema opening up with this theater, the drama boys, the theater context in which the Dravid movement was happening. And Karnan was a major theatrical event, basically. The Karnan figure was actually Shivaji Ganesan became a big hit because he did Karnan again and again in so many stages of the Dravidian party, right? And Karnan was actually referred as, the person was humiliated by, kind of the Aryan, kind of that kind of a dimension is there. I think quite a lot of studies are there. But what you've opened up is very interesting because, why, how do we understand this this was an industry which was actually was becoming a major, kind of a whole transitional public industry, the film for the cinema. The cinema was becoming kind of a complete transitional, mechanistic transitional industry in this time. And how do we basically see this filmmakers, the initial filmmakers who are using these stories, let's say for the mythical stories, for instance, and then use them for telling a story in as a filmic content? I think that's a very interesting question to ask, and I think that applies to most of the vernacular, and including Marathi, including Hindi industries, wherein the mythical stories become some content for actually telling the earlier star-studded big narratives, right? And then particularly in the Tamil context, or say for example South Indian context, then how the kind of relative telling of say Mahabharata or Ramayana, right? Eklavya or say or Karna as a kind of a characterization, or in fact further in Tamil, you have the story from, there's something called on Ravana Kavyam, right? On Ravana telling, from Ravana's perspective, the story, and Ravana becoming the hero, or which kind of retold within say Kala, the recent film by Ranjit, right? So I think there is this interesting dimension. But for me, how I used was Pantulu was himself wanting to make, I read a lot of stuff on Pantulu, right? And Pantulu, how was actually with his own budget limitations and so on and so forth, he was actually engineering this as some kind of a film to be done like these fellows, like these new people were doing it. And Pantulu's attempt was to not tell the Mahabharata of what was happening within the nationalist movement, right? Where Arjuna was this ideal, right? The Arjuna was right, the Rama was ideal to actually narrate the story. From where I think the counter-telling, or foregrounding this character as imagining a story, or rather having a story to tell, as aspiration as an aspiration of a people, as aspiration as an aspiration of a body politic, right? Or an imagination of an identification of a body politic as such. I think that kind of conceptualization is an intent for me to foreground that Karnan, and and the image trap in which the narrativization of it, the grandeur and the theatrical element, the theater as a kind of a background for using this vehicle, the star vehicle, as a political identity, or a political image, right, as such. So what happens is Shivaji Ganesan as the Karnan stands for the a kind of an ideologue, right? Like the Parashakti hero, right? 1960s, right? Ian telling about the first 15 minutes if you watch, I think it was also made in Telugu at once. First 15 minutes you watch, the whole content, the rhetoric becomes embodied, right, in the public humiliation of Karnan in front of vis-a-vis Arjuna, right, and then birth becomes a kind of a kind of identifier to be contested and taken as a contest, taken as a to be contested on, right. A different kind of identification is done with the Gauravas here, and the immediate kind of and the Pandavas are seen as somebody who are unethical, right, like for pawning their wife or losing the not living a honored life, and so and kind of strict strictures on how feminine or femininity is being constituted and so on and so forth. Right? So I think those were the context in which I was referring back to this history of retelling and the historical political movements that were happening, wherein the shifts across I've done, and this is a kind of a, while it's a third eventing, which also kind of a critique of these Karnans, of earlier Karnans, of earlier retellings, right? And with this arrival of say of Mari Selvaraj and Ranjit into this history, this trajectory of retellings. If you want to call it as retellings, but I think it's a third Karnan, if you want to tell, if you want to put it that way and see how it images, it represents and presents a different kind of a socio-politic here, and different content with a different style that happens, right? As such. And that's why I thought I thinking of also thinking it parallelly along with changes within the music industry, right? So I think that was the intent of which, if I did answer, but I think that was the intent in which I brought in the first Karnan.
Thanks, Vijay, for the question, and Lenny for responding. I mean, if we want to continue with this discussion on naming the film Karnan, I mean, my own sense when I was thinking about the film is that it seems to share more in common with a certain contemporary practice of naming that may be there, let's say in Paranjits, Kala, Kabali, Asuran, and this particular Karnan. So where there is an attempt, it seems to me, to kind of what shall we say? I mean, give a different kind of connotation to certain names that have been the subject of either ridicule or some kind of negative association with them. So it seems like this particular naming of the film, while your point with the earlier Karnan films, while that is a point that is well taken, I thought it's more part of this kind of practice, appropriation of a particular vilified character and reconfiguring that character towards a different kind of an aesthetics and politics, which is also something that is worked out in the film. For instance, that first song that you dwelt on, which is, I mean, quite a striking, song, and it's stunning actually when we enter the film through that song. I mean, it uses certain existing aesthetic, like the hero introduction song, which is there across probably all South Indian languages. But instead of the hero getting deified, I think, if I'm not mistaken, there is one line in the song which says, he's a man for whom there is no temple. He's a deity for whom there is no temple. So in that sense, it's also conversing with certain conventions of Tamil cinema, existing Tamil cinema, and reorienting those conventions, I was thinking, and this it does consistently throughout, the different through different ways. For instance, the friend of the hero. In most of these films, it's like it's not a peer, it's not someone of the same age who will build up the hero. But whether in the latest Ranjit's film, The Figure of Daddy, or even in this particular film, Karnan, the role played by Lal. So image of the friend, so the way in which it reprises some of these stock images from existing existing Tamil cinema, and re-articulates it in a very different, for a very different politics. I thought the naming was also part of that. I mean, but that's my take on the film. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely right. Absolutely, yeah. I think some friend of mine has also written a piece on the naming in Karnan. I think
Okay.
from HC only, from for I think the Wire. So where he takes in he does a different kind of study of how lawsuits were filed, with names, people having names. It's a kind of from last 50 years, 60 years. He traced it to actually then see how anti-caste movements and naming and that kind of informs this kind of filmmaking as such. That's one thing. So that's the contention I was making. This, of course, this is representative thing of telling one story and seeing a screening justice, and that is one way of doing looking at and studying films like Nagaraj Manjule or Ranjit or this one. But at the same time, they also take into their own contestation a history of filmmaking, a history of imaging, heroic, or the storytelling, or what is the hero, and so on. So, and that also take in hand simultaneously, and they had to contest that as well while they present the story, which is probably their own experiential stories. I think at once both is something what is happening, and that's what I try to do this part more. How there's a citation they're doing, vis-a-vis this history of film watching or history of figurations in the Tamil screen history as such. Yeah. You're right, man. You're right. Absolutely.
Okay. Anyone else who wants to come in at this point?
Shall I?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Thank you, Lenny, for this way of understanding the present Karnan through the earlier two moments. It is interesting, but the 1964 film, the way you tried to historicize it, can it be extended to the Telugu N.T. Ramarao film? Number one. Number two, generally B.R. Pantulu used to make films in all languages. Generally, it used to be multilingual productions. So it is not a question to Lenny, but others also here. Why it was not made in Kannada? In Kannada too, there was a vibrant drama tradition where Dhanashwara Karna play was very popular. But why it was not made into a film? And then the way you try to historicize in 1964 film in Malayalam, sorry, Tamil, can it be extended to NTR's version too?
I think so, sir, because I think this similar patterns with Tamil and Telugu, and Madras being this 1960s, Madras being this, space for filmmaking, and much more capital was invested in this both industries, the linguistically defined industries. And these two industries first experimenting with this myths, with epic myths as becoming story narratives for Telugu and Tamil. I think it could be applied, extended as well. I'm not sure why. I mean, this could be extended to Malayalam as well. Why was quite drastic movement was apparent there. But film like retelling of say mega myths. Probably it happens only in 1990s with Vadakan Particle, Mammootty doing the role of Chandu. The deceptive Chandu becoming the main storytelling. Probably Manju is here, she might tell more on this history. But I think these two industries of where this becomes possible by 1960s, the star, by 1980s or 1970s, 1980s, the star becoming the political figure or representing the state, and becoming, I think that is operative, and the fact that India was used as Krishna, and Shivaji was used as Karna, was also very interestingly deployed by Pantulu. I thought, in the way in which choice of characters were made, right? And I think that also extends. I mean, I wanted to do it also on Thalapathy. Why Rajini and Mammootty, and Iruvar, later, Mohanlal and another one. It's also quite interesting to see of how political historical figurations are recreated in contemporary story filmmakers, as such. I think this could be a longer work, as you're pushed in, and why certain stories come in certain language industries and certain stories don't come, and especially when the theatrical tradition is quite strong. And I think Karnan in Tamil wouldn't have happened but for this theatrical content being circulated. I think that is quite true, and Pantulu himself was telling, because this was Shivaji was doing this Karna character and because was very popular, right? He was the first choice for him to reimagine it in the filmic content, right? And I think that is one way to also historicize the link between, say, the theater tradition and the disappearance of theater tradition into integrated into the film, the popular film, right? And later onwards, and that kind of I don't know, Kannada and the Malayalam context, or Marathi, why this it comes or doesn't come. That's something we can actually work on. But I don't know about Kannada as such. Yeah, that's something we can.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Tarakeshwar, you want to take this question further about why it doesn't come in Kannada?
No, I am expecting an answer from any one of you.
Okay. Anyone who wants to respond at this point to this particular question, or to, bring up some other questions as well? Jayanto? Yeah, please go ahead, Jayanto, please go ahead.
No, I really don't have much to say. I because of my very great ignorance of films in Telugu and Tamil, and the only Malayalam films that I'm familiar with are Adoor's and George's films, So, but yes, very, very interesting film. And I have read something very recently, which is by someone called Balakrishna Ganeshan, he's a journalist, he's a film critic, and he's talking about two very, very recent films, both on the lives of boxers, There's one, and you have to pardon me for my atrocious, Tamil pronunciation, Sarpata Parambarai, and also there is this Hindi film Tufan, one, the Hindi one being directed by Rakesh Om Prakash Mehra, wherein he makes a point that this whole point of view which is shown in the Hindi film is the Brahmanical, and it is, of course, it is the story of Eklavya in a slightly modified form, and the Guru accepts him, but being condescending to him, and the whole point of view very Brahmanical in the Hindi film, whereas the point of view is that of Eklavya in the Tamil version, in the Tamil film, on more or less the same subject. So I have a feeling that this is probably, or is this probably the dominant narrative of the current Tamil cinema, the voice of the subaltern, and if it is, which I think it is, after the Dravida movement and all that, there is very little possibility of not, even if we take Paranjit films, Kala, Kabali and all that, but if we take the character of Dhanush, if we take the character certainly of Rajinikanth, and I'm not even going back to Shivaji Ganeshan and MGR and all that, that there is a certain godlike greatness assigned to the character of these people, which has an existence outside their films, which I have felt, which is more or less true of all kinds of cinema, but it is very, very prominent in Tamil cinema. And if this be the case, I see a kind of contradiction. I see a certain kind of problem in characters whom are understandably associated with being something larger than life, voicing subaltern concerns, there is an inbuilt contradiction in the situation. That is what I feel. But this being the dominant narrative of the present Tamil cinema, I think this is something that needs to be resolved, because here I think even Dr. Leonard, he has talked about how this whole question of caste in recent Tamil film. I was reading something by him. So he says that there are no new ways of seeing, I mean, this is of course in connection with Malayalam cinema, but here he talks about something called a Nazi gaze. If I'm not too mistaken, whose gaze is this, Is this the gaze of the Brahmanical characters or situations within the story, or is it the point of view of the critic and the analyst and all that? And also in vis-a-vis Malayalam cinema, there is this need for different ways of seeing caste, seeing within quotes, There have been already introductions of different ways of reading caste. Seeing caste is still, although I'm not very familiar with the caste dynamics in Malayalam, in Kerala, the article, if I seem to remember correctly, talks about as to how all the main characters are either Nayars or Syrian Christians, and they are fair-skinned. And when they talk about caste and how bad caste is, they talk about how it used to be in the past, But there seems to be a kind of an oblivion. There seems to be a kind of inability to be able to discuss caste or show caste in the present day context, So we need to sort of work around this. That's what I feel, The whole question of caste is too important, to leave as a discussion or even to leave as a posture. It needs to be addressed a little more meaningfully. Thank you.
Yeah, Lenny, you want to respond?
I think it is very clearly, I think, stated. I think there's nothing to add, but just to build on, probably, one of the things that is of concern is, I think with filmmakers like Ranjit, Nagaraj, Manjule, and with Mari Selvaraj recently, I think one of the major things is, as of now, as you put into counterimpose these meanings which are godlike, but who are actually presenting that, presenting or occupying those shoes. I think that is the concern. That's a moment I think it's going on. The same time, like Professor Dasgupta has pushed in, is seeing caste, seeing thing is largely presented in Tamil. You want to see differently, distinctly. But that story is being presented. Reading it, probably is something, reading it with different implications, amplifications is something I think, Tamil cinema needs. How do we read a different characters or different ways of telling and so on and so forth is something I think, and that's why I think the medium becomes very interesting, because Ranjit does this other what do you say, the extra things to films. He runs his band, music band. He funds short films. In those experiments, I think, or then he has a production house where he encourages filmmakers to tell these marginal stories with not so godlike presentations. I think those things are done very distinctly. But when it comes to present in this grand scale, I think the story is of this grandeur of a more than kind of thing, which is a very political presenting of the story, a presenting of characterization. I think sports dramas as a genre itself is again aspirational, right? The Sarpata Parampara he was referring to, and the genre is also selected probably to populate it with these characters of a historical film. I think that seeing thing is experiment quite interesting in the Tamil context, but I think reading it distinctly somewhere else and not in the mainstream is something can push within the Tamil context. I think that will be taken as a very interesting critique and very interesting add-on to think about these films. Malayalam, of course, there's a lot of critique on the question of caste and gender as well, and there's a movement also, I think. So I think that's also valid to compare these two industries, which is quite questions taken in a well. Reading is, I go along with.
Anyone else would like to come in at this point? Paniraj sir.
No. I was thinking about Karnan only in a context of Dalit assertion, which is brought from Neelam films, where restructuring the popular narrative with Dalit representation, which was subordinated to, say, middle caste and Savarna caste. So Paranjit's whole project is to break the structure of popular films and reinvert them and bring the representation of Dalit and subaltern classes to the fore by subverting the representation in popular films. So Paranjit doesn't pretend that he will do an alternative kind of art films. As he stated openly in an interview, he wants to subvert the images or characters or representations in popular film and bring back the subaltern representations in his films. That's what he did in Madras, Atakattai, Kala and Kabali. But Mari Selvaraju is doing in a different way with his first film, Periyarum Perumal, where aspirations of Dalits, how Dalits are placed, or subaltern classes are placed within a society, and how they fight back the caste system, including especially in Tamil Nadu, the middle class, the landed middle caste and their hegemony. So we were looking at Karnan in that context only. I mean, taking off from what even Dalapati from Maniratnam, which want to show the state with a benevolence of a familial relations, where the Pandava side is represented by the SP of a district, which is having a benevolent family connection. But in Mari Selvaraj's Karnan, the state itself is Pandavas, and a whole subaltern class is represented as led by Karnan in a fight against the state. Of course, Mari Selvaraju in Karnan packs many things. Of course, as Dickens has correctly said, he brings in 3 or 4 representations of Karnan, folkloric as well as against the state, and 3 or 4 versions of Dalit resistance, which is possible, which is too much in a film. That means he has packed too many things as a Dalit representation in Karnan. But in any way, I think I was not thinking in that terms, in that framework of relating him to what is Pantulu's or N.T. Ramrao's Karnan. If you remember, N.T. Ramrao, when he was at the peak of Telugu Desham, he did his Danavira Shurakarna, where he did 3 roles. He did Karna, he did Duryodhana, and he was a Krishna. But when he was waging a war against the center, he did that Danavira Shurakarna, where he did 3 roles, where the protagonist central role is Danavira Shurakarna, which was a kind of a political a political implication of challenging the center. So in this mega narratives of popular films and their central characters challenging some power, as N.T. Ramarao did, of course, as Pantulu's Karnan, retelling of Karnan has happened during that reframing of nationalist narratives. But this Karnan, I was thinking in 2010 framework, where it is subaltern classes against state, and it is entirely framed that nowhere getting connected with the previous versions. They want a departure, and they want identity of subalterns against the state. So what should be Dalit politics against the oppression of the state as well as the caste, state represented in the caste. So I was seeing Karnan in that framework, but Dickens has brought the larger connections between that through many of them. I should rethink about all these things.
Thank you, Dr. Selvaraj, for this interesting comment. Absolutely, I mean, take the last point very seriously, because everything is a departure. I mean, the first Karnan to the second one, it's also historical departure, but also at the stylistic and also at the way in which the film itself is treated. There are also departures as such. So I take in that argument, right? And especially the last Mari's Karnan is also, it's also a comment on a real caste violence that happened in the 1990s. The Kodian Kulam caste violence, where a whole Dalit village was completely ramified by the caste and state nexus, right, through police violence. It's a kind of there could have been a documentary made, right? I mean, people are all citing this was not original, this was not the year. It's an artistic kind of an intervention that Mari is very clearly. He's writing a fiction on this, he's writing a film, he's making a film on this, he's creating characters and identifications on it. He's making a metaphorical telling stories which are metaphorical nature. Like that is a kind of an artistic way in which a historical event is recounted and told, right? And I think that is probably the departure and the distinction and arrival, right? That the film as a technology is also taken as a tool, like literature was or writing was, right? And then used it for a different purpose by Mari and probably Ranjit as well, together. And I think the Ranjit phenomenon of the early 2010 or 2011 onwards is phenomenal in creating this environment and atmosphere for marginal filmmakers to come and then actually attempt at as an alternative hegemony of a kind, and tell stories. So much so, even mainstream filmmakers have to then tell stories, have to then turn or kind of change in the ways in which they treat characters, right, in spaces or figurations, like like on whom Ranjit and Mari Selvaraj and others have actually created stories on. So in a way in which the culture of filmmaking and telling stories also changes with their presence in the industry. I think that for that, I think I'm not I do not want to tell one singular person is doing it, but it is a phenomenon which is actually which is started off, reels off, from say early. There are also probably industrial reasons for it from 2010 onwards, right? It's not industry anymore; it's a corporation of a kind which is turned over with huge digital making and screens becoming smaller and distance, and it is at that level with small media and small instruments with much more clearer ways in which of engaging with the image, right, or the sound, the ways in which sounds are captured, and with the technological change. In this context, film content is being changed with these filmmakers. I think all this goes into effect in making this Karnan operative as a kind of a third event within this process. Thanks, anyways, for your interesting and
one more observation what I want to make is, of course, in Malayalam, I am not sure, but I have seen Malayalam theatre productions and Kannada theatre productions more and more relying on Basa's Karnabara, of reinterpreting Basa's Karnabara as a caste assertion and villainousness of the Pandavas and Krishna, as again in reinterpreting Basa's Karnabara from the caste angle as injustice continuously done to Karna by the state. So the caste and the state has been brought together, and Karnabara is being reinterpreted in this without breaking the framework of Basa's drama. That is being happening in Kannada, repertory plays, and I have watched some of the Malayalam versions, Malayalam asserting Karna's caste, but I'm not sure in the films that kind of representation Karnan is not brought in. But what is very interesting in Mari Selvaraju is the three kinds of resistance which is proposed for Dalits. One is by saying that being self-reliant, getting the education, like kind of a Bedkarite prescription of getting educated, getting employed, and being self-reliant. That will break you away from the hegemonic caste version is one. The second one is militant guerrilla warfare, which is happening in Bihar, right? Which also happened in Tamil Nadu, but which doesn't happen in Kilvanmani, but it happened in the 1990 this village issue, where a kind of a guerrilla resistance did happen, which brings back to the Dalit assertion or Dalit revolt in parts of Bihar. I mean, Naxalite strengthened Bihar. That's what leading us to Bhima Koregaon connection, etc., etc. Don't want to comment on that. The third is, I am not sure what kind of folkloric presentations of Mahabharata are there in Tamil, but there are many versions in Kannada where the inversions have been done, but that not being used. The specific folkloric version of deities coming in as a form of resistance, Dalit resistance through folkloric re-narrativizing the situations and urging the hero to push up. So these three kinds of Dalit resistance is posed, and Mari Selvaraju, that's the point I tried to make. Mari Selvaraju packs all these three into one, which becomes very dense. And at the last scene, you could see that the deities are asking him to go ahead with the resistance. He has suffered in the hands of the state. He has been brutalized, and he comes back, and now he is marrying Draupadi. And Draupadi is also concerned that if you go on single-mindedly fighting yourselves, where is life for you? Where is family for you? So in the last scene, while the deities are praising him and asking him to push forward, and village is asking him to be a hero of resistance, there is you can see in mid-close shots a concern in the face of Karnan as well as Draupadi, that will it continue like this? Will this resistance will continue? Which Mari Selvaraju is also thinking, which reminds me of the last scene in Pererum Perumal. So this film is very important for me, is also in testing in what way Dalit can resist the oppression of the state and oppression of the caste. What is the way out? So that's why I said I was thinking Karnan wholly in the framework of Dalit resistance rather than connecting it to the previous versions, where the state itself has become Pandavas.
Dickens.
Yeah, go ahead, Vijay. Go ahead.
Yeah, this is in relation to what Paniraj has been talking about, the relationship between Karnan and state. What is your response? I mean, I'm not sure if Karnan is trying to resist state. I'm still in the dark. I need to think about that. But are there films like Karnan which try to resist state in their struggle or in their in whatever sense? Like if you take Karnan, what's your response to what Paniraj has been talking about, the relationship between state and subaltern forces? Because if you look at what's happening in the mundane socio-political context, though there is a resistance to state, still these forces are also dependent on state for various reasons. Are there films in Tamil which try to project this other side of the Dalits or the subaltern forces? resisting state, but at the same time trying to, as a last resort, trying to get back to state for support, or for reliance, or whatever.
Yeah, actually, I think to foreground these filmmakers, particularly Ranjit and Mari, there's a kind of state is not seen as the ultimate, only kind of the other of. So it depends on each context. Say, for example, the aspiration of, say, even within the film, the aspiration of this community is to enter, get a governmental job, and a very interesting critical moment, the government job comes, and the whole community comes to discuss, send off this guy. You go, you are the only one to then actually move away and give us some kind of identification, a kind of aspiration identification to the community, right? Which is rejected, and attempts at creating this, the attempts at actually for him to say the whole scene very interestingly staged, right, with cuts and wonderful ways in which the narration is done, where he goes to participate in an open call to be recruited in the military, right? And this Tata, this Eman, as somebody after him, there's nobody who has gone into the military. Like, and he's therefore pushing people to enter into the CRPF. See, this dimension is there even in Ranjit, right? So in Ranjit's Kala or Kabal, you will have figures who are inside the state who are then, kind of, become part, or, they come and inform, but they are not in decisive power. The power structures in which the state operates as violence, especially, is immediately placed within either a cultural or a casteist, kind of a role, right? In the way in which power is exercised on the community, on the subordinized or the subordinated community. The subordination, right, of the state is via a certain kind of nexus between the caste, class, elite, which is then operated on. So I think the organizational principle on which this is, this done then is going into community resources. For example, even in Karnan, was telling about the folkloric, right? Fani was telling about the folkloric. It's very interesting. The first death, right? The first death which happens in where the movie starts off with. This is a small girl before marriage, she dies, and there's a whole tradition within Tamil Dalit communities where when a girl dies before puberty, she becomes a little goddess, right? And that's the story. That's what he pitches up, but he doesn't fix it as some kind of cultural anthropological kind of content, and there's a story behind, and that story behind this girl dies because nobody stops the bus or car for the girl to be taken to a hospital and so on and so forth, and then that becomes a kind of a crisis with the state, right? Why this space doesn't get a bus stop, and they've been running for 30-40 years for getting a bus stop. What does the bus stop mean to the community, to leave? What is this modern vehicle means, for the community there which is stuck, serving the elite, native village, right? It opens up a newer dimension about talking about, self-respect, dignity, mobility, mobilization, and so on and so forth. And this is where state is, attuned there, right? It is not that, say the upper caste village, right? They are part of the state. It's not that, they don't even belong to the same perhaps caste, right? And that village head is also kind of subservient to the collector and the DSP, the officer, the Kannabiran officer. But there's a certain kind in which the state and the local elite come together, even without affecting on them. There's a way in which the nexus that is brought in, right, in putting them, and that's where the opposition is then organized within something outside the state. There are films which are brought in to open up the power of the state, by Vetrimaran's interrogation, which is this film. I mean, English title is Interrogation. Tamil is Visarani. Yeah. So where this power of the state is actually, which is also a novel made from a novel. Very interestingly, right? The survivor writes a novel, a kind of a biographical narrative of this event, and that is made into a kind of a realistic film, which is not within the aesthetic parameters of the popular film, right? Which is then opened up in film festivals, and it comes back with award-winning citations and so on and so forth, which then pushes him to make another film called Asuran later, and and I think contents of this Visaranai gets recreated in that prison scene, right? The prison scene where where these elders are brought in, they are beaten up, Helen and Blue, and then you have to weave popular narrative, a popular kind of identification of this resistance coming in and breaking up, by the youth of this, headed by Dhanush and so on. So it's very interestingly, content gets transferred, right, for different purpose, for a different appeal. I think that is something operative because of perhaps post 2010 kind of smaller budget or smaller conglomerations coming together to make easier way, rather than the earlier corporations, like you have big film production houses, right, which then deal with who should be the actor, who should be the director. It's a kind of, they make the films. From there to smaller groups coming together and then funding. Most of these films are funded by themselves or similar, and then it's a different kind of a, probably an economic order, which was Nikhila and others, we are trying to figure this out, how this operates within the probably South Indian or the new cinema of the 21st century. It's operated within. I think in this context, I think films like this are made. And interestingly, Vijay, actually, you have in parallel more films coming on the police, where the hero is the police officer, right? The hero is the police officer, and there's more films on the police officer as symbol of the state and order and the reflection of some kind of a commune, Tamil community, or interestingly, earlier it was an officer, inspector from, say, each vernacular space will save the nation, will be going to Kashmir to save the, from terrorists. From there, you have this, different kind of dynamic. Say, for example, there are films in Tamil where, officer would be very interestingly placed so that he saves people from, say, seashore terrorism, or people who are, taking arms, right? Black, in the black market, arms in the black market. So it opens up to a different kind of dimension, where the police officer becomes a symbol for, at once, kind of the hero figure, but also an aspirational figure. Then sports becomes part of it. The body becomes a, kind of a heroic identification, and so on and so forth. I think it's quite an interesting way in which films can be placed together as a culture of films, which are operative, and then how you see largely within these two people, they see the police department as largely inimical to the welfare of the subaltern movement and mobilization. And that is actually quite clear in these films. Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
sorry, I to intervene again. And you can see the effect of the films, especially Paranjit films and Mari Selvaraj films, are films which is coming from Neelam Productions as a whole. He has a very appreciative effort in production and distribution and discussion. But kind of effect it is having on young Dalit activists, which in Karnataka, which we are, after seeing the film, what is the reaction? When Periyaram Perumal came, few of the our younger comrades, Dalit comrades, were very angry that Dalits are not hitting back. I mean, why they are facing this? I mean, few commented getting beaten and then talking about coexistence. What kind of is it? So they wanted Fundry to happen. They wanted Kala and Kabali to happen. So when Karnan came, there was a mixed opinion. Like, what is this? What is this? What is this? I mean, like whether it is taking on or whether it is not. So there is a kind of aspiration outside the framework of the film or artistic framework of the film, of whatever genre it is, from the Dalit movements and Dalit aspirations as an effect of their social positions and existence and assertion. So that is also interesting in the films what Paranjit and his team is making, because there is a bigger aspirations from society, from subaltern youth and subaltern educated class.
Yeah. Anyone else who wants to respond? Rajan, Sridhar, Rajan? Sridhar? Yeah, Tarkeshwar, go ahead.
Just two quick points. One about looking at this police as state. I think Dickens, while ending his last intervention, he said they're looking at police department as inimical. So this, should we look at police as representing the state in this narrative, or should we look at it only as a police department? So that is an interesting point. I think we need to think about that. And second point, what I was to say. Yeah, the second point was about, see, the bus which was not stopping there, it was not a public government transport system. It was a private public transport system. And interestingly, that private bus owner says, we are ready to stop. The police come in the way. So this capital, private capital, the way it comes out in this narrative is quite interesting, I thought. Just two quick.
Yeah, it's an interesting, I think, observation, because I think the discussion itself comes in the film of this, private, and then at the end also, it's a minibus again, a private, venture, which then gives a bus, through which people go out and leave the city, and so that's a kind of a thing the film makes a statement. There's no government bus stop, or but then you see the movement itself is off. It's kind of, and the movement comes when only after this event, after this criminal event happens, when he's taken into the police station for 10 years. It's an interesting reading by Dharmaraj. I think this Tamil writer is also Professor Madurai Kamaraj. He takes that, he tells it how these movements, civic right movements, of these contexts generally work with this passionate youth. The passionate youth, as the angry young man of the films, actually has a local identification with the political movements. The angry young man as a kind of an identifier of these political movements, and how state response to his political movements as actually nullifying these figures. So in a sense, she says he has argued that him coming back from the police station and all the big wigs dead and getting into marriage is a defeat of this angry young man as an identifier for these political movements, who is carefree, who doesn't fear. There's a fearlessness that is embodied. Even female figures will be like that, and that is the state's act is to nullify, and these movements are kind of suppressed, because of losing these younger, the aspirational, passionate figures, and the film actually documents this. You lose major characters, major leaders in the of the movement. At the same time, you also lose the younger fellows to a certain kind of a normalization, right? And I think it's in that way the character is the characterization of this figure who could be a potential leader of the movement is lost out, and I think he argues on to actually how the figure is actually nullified. There's no Karnan. Actually, Karnan cannot come back after 10 years. Karnan cannot come back as a leader, cannot be built up as a leader, because because of this moment where he kills this police, and it's lost. That's the moment it's lost, and the kind of that is a cut off, for the movement to actually have a. It's for just this bus to come in and then take up for a social movement of kind, but not for any political kind of a emergence of a leader, of a hero, who then becomes a leader of the that is kind of that is a difference between, say, from other individuated, like say Iruvar or something. That's the kind of a difference between a figure becoming a hero, or a leader, or a political representative, to a kind of character which then is only used, or rather is represented for a certain kind of a social mobility, which is the coming of a bus to a village. And this is his reading. I thought it was quite interesting thing to actually read it along with Professor Tara's kind of an observation here, right? And the private capital, and the debate there of the state and the capital, or the police and the capital. The representative of the capital here was a bus operator, the bus industry operator. I thought it's quite interesting to think it along with Professor Dharmaraj's intervention as well. Thank you, Tara, sir.
Anyone else? Rajan?
Yeah, I would
Yeah,
just
yeah.
like to say,
Yeah, go ahead.
yeah, I found the donkey very interesting and the idea of freedom and Paulo Freire's notion of cultural action for freedom, where everybody takes responsibility for the action, right? Yeah, which is something that really is talking about subalterns fighting for uh, their rights, right? And also taking responsibility and uh, thinking about who has done it, right? So I think when we go to pedagogy of the breast, etc., this is an important moment, right? But also I have some doubts, especially when we take up Nilkant Shastri's view of the anti-Sanskritization movement, which goes back 2000 years, right? So, is this using the Mahabharata a kind of Aryanization which is going on? Because that's what Nilkant Shastri is trying to do. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, Lenny, you want to respond?
I didn't get the second point on the Nilakanta Shastri's argument. But what I get a sense is this using Mahabharata as a tale to as a kind of a negative reference, for telling stories would then itself be Aryanization. I think it is not, but in a sense that there's a reference to counter, but I think the films can also, because of the reading that I gave, it might think that all these filmmakers are very consciously making counter films to Mahabharata and Ramayana. But I think there is an internal reference to it to tell a counter, but also the film also stands on its own. And I think that history is something, it's a history of sensibility, because this could come and sell and be received because of a history of, say, literary movements, history of political movements that go hand in hand, right? Which has a very contextual, and in fact a very coincidental history within Tamil public sphere. I think otherwise, I think stories like this, cannot. Even if they come, I think it might look very foreign for this audience. They also are celebrated because it's more than seen more than perhaps any identity and kind of a context alone, right? So I think that is also taken. I think that is very important to think about the kind of, what do you say, the nowness of this film. That's probably one way of putting it. But at the same time, it cannot be just celebrated as, okay, this is somebody newly telling a story about his community, or a story about his experience, kind of a experiential narrative, in a kind of a global format. It's not just there is a very strong historical background to it for these stories to come and occupy and kind of be received by the audience, and received and recognized as something which is crucial for changing the dynamic of cinematic practice and cinematic participation. I think that's very important with this, with particularly with, say, with Karnan, but also as a post on this phenomenon. That's one thing I think. The second one about the Aryan thing, that is also stated. I started off with that because of the Dravidian counter imagination within the Tamil Dravidian movement, and the use of film as a star vehicle for pitching in certain, say, images as political imaginations, right? The star image of MGR, or the content, the filmic content for, say, the films that Shivaji Ganeshan acted as Tamil films, or Tamil identity, or Tamil history as such, myth making of the Tamil identity and so on. So I think, and this goes hand in hand. At the same time, there's a departure, and that's what Fanny very well interestingly told. But also, it's operated in other linguistic states, wherein it goes along with a certain kind of linguistic belonging, or vernacular citation of certain sensibilities, right? Literary sensibilities, but also cultural sensibilities that are also incorporated as cinematic industries, right? Where the audience and the linguistic nations, or rather community, is defined by its film industry as market, as a market, as also as part of a cultural industry of a film. I think both go hand in hand for me. If I want to take that question bit further.
Yeah, anyone else? Manju, Sridhar, do you have anything to say? Okay. If that's it, if no one else has anything to say about the film any further, I think we've had a long and interesting discussion about Karnan. Thanks very much, Lenny, for pushing us to think about the film in a different kind of framing. I think from the ones that we have, we generally used to in the many articles that have been written about contemporary Tamil cinema. Thanks for suggesting the film, and thanks everyone for joining in the discussion today. See you all next week, and next week we begin the Iranian Film Festival, which is being curated by Professor Praveena Cooper. So hope to see you all next week, and bye and good night.
Thank you, Lenny. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
See you. Good night.
Good
Good night.
night. Yeah, bye. Good night.